I was having Rico from RicoScores, and we are here to break down Day 9 of the Washington Commanders 2024 training camp. Of course, we're going to go position group by position group, but we have a lot of very notable things that we definitely got to talk about today. First of all, apparently wide receiver Dyami Brown is a roster lock. You'll probably be surprised how high up he is on the depth chart. Also, we're hearing about some Jamin Davis improvement. Jayden Daniels had an excellent day today and ripped off a 75-yard touchdown run. We're going to break that down. And also, I'm hearing that a lot of the cornerbacks really ate up today. Like, it was a no-fly zone for a certain part of practice. We're going to dive into all of that and more. Of course, we're going to dive into literally every position group. We have a Jayden Daniels press conference after practice. Of course, Quinn speaks before every practice. We have some notable quotables that come from that as well. We have a big-time special teams update as far as returners go, kickers, and even some additional punters that were brought in. We're going to dive into all that and more, especially a big-time injury update, our biggest injury update today. Before we dive into all of that, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure y'all stay tuned because I'm keeping y'all updated on every little thing going on with the Commanders. I'm so excited about this joint practice because I will break that down just like I break down these other training camp practices, and I will be live streaming every preseason game, including this upcoming one against the Jets within less than a week. I'm really excited about that. I'll be breaking down everything live like I do with every typical regular season game. So pull up for that. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this video, man. Let's get it. Adam. All right, so before practice even started, shouts out to Mitch Tischler for always keeping track of this, but Bryson Tremaine was yet again the first player onto the field. The 6'4", 6'5", somewhere in that range wide receiver. Either way, he's the tallest receiver in our receiver room by at least 2 inches of height. So, hey man, he already has that niche going for him. We're going to talk about him later in this video because he's really starting to stand out, not only just for his height, but how he's been producing in practice. We'll get there, but again, just to keep you updated, he was the first player onto the practice field once again. And shouts out to Mark Tyler for pointing this out. Good for Tremaine, a 6'4", 212-pound presence at wide receiver who can also play special teams and has that outwork anyone mentality. I completely agree, man. Bryson Tremaine, it may be your time. I was predicting him to potentially make the team last year just off of the fact that we didn't have any tall receivers. They kept Cam Sims around for a reason, at least the previous regime did, even though they just completely decided to just not throw the ball his way for whatever reason. But they kept him around because of his height. So last year I was like, well, they're going to at least keep somebody with some height that's at least taller than 6'1", and they just ended up not doing it. But this time around, he's making more plays. We'll see. Again, we'll talk about that more a little bit later when we get to the wide receiver part of this video. Now, injuries, this is probably our most hurt day of the offseason so far. Now, it's nothing like completely like year changing, like season changing, like we're cooked type of thing, but this is definitely probably the longest list of injury updates that I've given you in any single video. First of all, Johnny Newton, even though he has not had a setback, he is on load management from the Commanders coaches right now themselves. He feels good. He's good on his end, but they did start to ramp him up recently, but now they're starting to ramp him back down to the point that I don't even think he practiced today. No reported setback, no additional injuries, nothing lingering or anything like that. Just part of the plan from the very beginning. This is how it's supposed to play out. I'm hoping that we can see him in the preseason game against the Jets and hopefully those joint practices as well, but I'm not absolutely sure about that because the main goal is for him to be ready by week 1. Quinn even spoke about Johnny Newton before practice today. He said that he will not be practicing today, and he said that they'll ramp up back over like the next 2 to 3 weeks when it comes to him. And he also said, quote, "Man, do you feel his speed? He has speed more like a defensive end, but the size of a big guy," unquote. I'm telling you, I'm not saying that he's Aaron Donald, but he has a lot of Aaron Donald traits. A little guy that's a little small for defensive tackle, but he's gonna make noise. I'm telling you, watch out. And then also, Quinn said that they will use load management when it comes to defensive tackle Johnny Newton, and they want to limit the wear and tear on Jonathan Allen as well. That's why they added defensive tackle Taylor Stallworth today. Well, By the time y'all are seeing this, because I'm recording this at 11:30 p.m. Sunday, August 4th, by the time y'all are seeing this, it will have already been Monday. So when I say today, just remember I'm talking about August 4th. But that's why they signed Taylor Stallworth earlier today, just to give you an explanation from the head coach himself, Dan Quinn. Also, Derek Forrest was finally at practice again, and he had his helmet, but no pads. So I'm not sure if he participated or not. I have heard absolutely nothing from him, even the practices that he was healthy. So who knows? But either way, at least he's getting healthier. I don't know if he's fully healthy yet, but he's not as hurt as he used to be at least. And then also, Andrew Wiley is still experiencing some tightness, so that kept him out of 11-on-11 drills, but I believe he did participate in individual drills, warmed up. He did everything but the 11-on-11s. And then Samuel Cosme was just straight up missing from practice entirely. I don't know exactly what for, but that's probably the biggest concern that I take away from any injury report that I'm giving you in this video that happened in practice earlier today, August 4th, day 9 of training camp practice. Samuel Cosme just wasn't there, and nobody has really provided an update as to why he's not there. Nobody really knows. I'm hoping that Dan Quinn gives us an update the next morning that we have practice. And then also Trent Scott and Michael Dieter took their place as the starting right tackle and right guard respectively. So out there with the first teams, since Andrew Wiley and Samuel Cosme were gone, you had Michael Dieter at right guard and Trent Scott at right tackle. We're going to talk about that in greater detail once we get to the offensive line part of this video. Also, shouts out to Felix Tramel, because he pointed out the fact that he didn't see Dante Fowler today, and it could be a day off. I haven't heard any confirmation from anybody else, but that is what Felix observed from practice. Also, offensive lineman Alex Akumbulu got hurt during 11-on-11's works, and he initially started to walk off in his own, and then they just kind of sat him down and then allowed the cart to come out and get him. So he technically got carted off, but initially he was walking off on his own. Hopefully the injury is not as bad as it seems. Now let's move on to the coaches, more specifically Dan Quinn, and a lot of the things that he had to say before practice even started. Well, first of all, he said that the Commanders held a mock game on Saturday without media and fans present. So yesterday, technically, even though by the time y'all are watching this, it was 2 days ago. But either way, August 3rd, even though we skipped that day in practice because technically Friday was practice 8, they had like a little mini practice apparently Saturday that was not open for anybody else to see but the coaches, the players, and people a part of the organization. That's it. No media members, no nothing. And then we skipped that day as far as counting practices, and that's why Sunday's August 1st practice was practice 9, even though technically it's like 9.5. But either way, the Commanders held a mock game on Saturday without media and fans present. Coach Dan Quinn said that he was pleased with the result and happy to get some deeper game scenarios in the practice, time management, things like that. And I'm pretty sure that the reason that the fans and media weren't allowed there is, first of all, it was a shorter practice. Also, because now that we're starting to get into mock game things, you're starting to get into strategy things. Like we're starting to look at certain plays and personnel groupings that Cliff Kingsbury may like to use in the regular season. Same thing on the defensive side of the ball with Joe Witt Jr. and stuff like that. And we don't want any of that information leaking out to anybody, because anytime the cameras are on, we're gonna be extremely vanilla, and we're gonna hope to catch teams off guard in the regular season with some of our strategies. So why would we allow fans and media members to pull up and potentially leak that information out there? We already saw what happened with Brandon Ayuk and Jayden Daniels. We don't want to have anything like that just from a random fan, or even other teams knowing that we're gonna have an open practice that's gonna potentially contain some valuable information on us and what we may potentially want to do offensively and defensively once we get to the regular season. They could just straight up send a spy, like just go in there with a Commanders jersey and act like you're a Commanders fan, but you're really a Cowboys fan, just trying to, get information on the Commanders and what they plan on doing this upcoming season. So you just never know. I appreciate the fact that they are going to reserve some practices to where no fans, no media, any of us will know what's going on in practice. That's perfectly fine with me, as long as it results in wins in the regular season and potentially the postseason. Perfectly fine with me. Also, Sam Fortier brought up a great question about quantity of reps versus quality of reps. And Commanders coach Dan Quinn said that there's a place for the hard practices, but also a place for lowering the intensity. He said, quote, "You manage the focus, I'll manage your reps," unquote. Is basically like something that he tells the players very often. And I like that quote. unquote. And then lastly, before we move on to the quarterbacks, Dan Quinn also talked about Jayden Daniels' scrambling on Tuesday. And he said, quote, yeah, you do want to be able to have the dual threat. It's the finish of the play if he extends it, because you're extending usually to remain a passer first. And so that's where his strength comes in. If he just gets outside the pocket to run, that's a lot easier to defend. So you're outside the pocket, but this player can stay alive and throw in the move. That's where it is. And then as he gets closer to contact, we're going to go over and visit the Nationals a lot and learn sliding and other important topics down the line, unquote. That entire quote came from Dan Quinn himself. So there's a heavy focus on Jayden Daniels' ability to use his legs, but also staying safe with it, and also emphasizing the fact that we need to work on sliding a little bit more. Now, speaking of Jayden Daniels, let's get to the quarterbacks. And of course, when I say quarterbacks, we're only here for Jayden Daniels, unless Marcus Mariota, Jeff Driscoll, or Sam Hartman do something just absolutely spectacular to the point that I feel like I have to talk about it. We're just here to discuss Jayden Daniels, I'm not gonna lie. So at first, before practice even started, Dan Quinn said that Jayden Daniels will play in the preseason Game 1 preseason debut for the 2024 Washington Commanders against the New York Jets in New Jersey. Shouts out to George Carmi because he brings up a good point. I'd be curious to see how long he plays. I mean, as far as like whether he will play or not, that wasn't really much of like a option. We kind of all assumed that he would more than likely play. It would have been a way bigger story and a weirder situation if he did not play in this first preseason game. But going back to George Carmi, he said, considering the joint practices that are coming up this week, Daniels will be getting better real work against the Jets in practice than potentially even in the preseason game. The actual game will probably be less intense and more procedural. And that's a great point to bring up. So we'll see how much Jayden Daniels actually ends up playing in the preseason game. But George Carmi brings up a good point that the practice may actually be more intense than the preseason game itself. So he'll probably get out there in the preseason game, but we really shouldn't really hamper on the Commanders to force them to play Jayden Daniels very long, because really honestly he's developing quicker and getting better and gaining more experience and things like that at a more efficient rate in those practices than he will in the preseason games. Now, Nikki Javala also brought up a great point about Dan Quinn talking about Jayden Daniels' decision making today and how much it's a really big deal to Dan Quinn. And any Commanders fan who's watched their carousel of quarterbacks in recent years should know why it's such a big deal. Decision making. The exact quote from Dan Quinn, quote, "It's the decision making that maybe I've been really impressed by. Where to go. Not just the throwing, but playing the position. This coverage goes to here, this look goes to here, and I got the matchup I want, I go to here." So there's your skill work, and then there's your processing work, and the processing part of him has been excellent, unquote. And that's probably the biggest praise that a head coach can give his rookie second overall pick quarterback. You can't do much better than you being a good processor of information, a great decision maker at the quarterback position. That's probably the most important trait. I agree with at Burgundy blog. He said single most important variable, very, very big if true. And then before we actually get into what happened in like team drills today, during some like warm up individual stuff, Jayden Daniels did a drill, and it was pretty interesting to see how excited he was after he finished the drill. Now let's get to the team drill stuff, because again, like I said before the intro, Jayden Daniels had a great day today. First of all, Linnell Willingham pointed out the fact that Jayden Daniels had a really nice tight window throw on the run over the middle, dropped it, but Davion Davis dropped it. Great ball, but Davion Davis just couldn't hold on. And again, I just want to remind y'all that Davion Davis has gotten a lot of looks with the starters. I don't know if that necessarily means that he's a roster lock to make this 53-man roster. We're going to really dive into that once we get to the receiver room and we start talking about Dyami Brown, like I foreshadowed before the intro. But Davion Davis has been playing quite a bit with the starters and receiving passes from Jayden Daniels himself. But either way, apparently Jayden Daniels had a beautiful throw, tight window, while on the run. Davion Davis just dropped it sadly. Then later on, Linnell Willingham pointed out that Jayden Daniels had a beautiful ball to Jahan Dotson on a corner for about 25-30 yards. And he said that it was an excellent job layering the ball over the sinking cornerback. Can't wait to see him versus the Jets. So this sounds like a situation where, first of all, Jayden Daniels and Jahan Dotson, their chemistry is only growing and growing and growing. They're starting to be an unstoppable duo as well, just like he already is with Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. Those are like three very dependable guys that we know are going to contribute and produce on game days, because Jayden Daniels is already like this with those guys. But on top of that, on this play, it seems like Jayden Daniels did the main reason I'm bringing this up during the quarterback part of this and not the Jahan Dotson receiver part of this is because, again, Linnell pointed out the fact that he layered the ball over a cornerback that was in front of the play. So it sounds like Jayden Daniels threw this ball with a lot of touch. And I mean, you could technically work on touch, but it seems to be one of those things that you have, but you just don't. Some quarterbacks just never gain it, no matter how hard they try. And the fact that Jayden Daniels already has at least some touch to his game as a rookie that hasn't even played a regular season game yet, sky's the limit for him, man. Also, as you notice, we get way less tweets and articles about what Jayden Daniels does in practice, like individual throws and plays and things like that. Just like a few practices ago, you were getting tweets and people talking about every single throw that he completed, basically. Now we're to the point that they only talk about the main highlights of the day. I mean, it's to the point that like him balling out is starting to become the norm, and people don't even really talk about it. It's kind of like expected at this point, and they're probably only really going to start talking about Jayden Daniels in great detail if he makes mistakes. But like, as far as him doing great plays, that's just everyday stuff. Another day at the office with Jayden Daniels is no longer a thing that a lot of people pay heavy attention to like they did just a few days ago in practices. It's actually really crazy how quick that switch up was just from all of the media members that are going to practices. Ben Standig also said today's highlight that you'll probably see later on the team's feed was a Jayden Daniels perfect deep shot from the pocket to Jahan Dotson, who found space around the 5. Even on quieter days, the quarterback makes a play in practice that shows you why the hype is immense. He consistently shows flashes, and that's really like the microcosm of what I hope this season is. I mean, ideally, it would be nice if we win enough games to go to the playoffs and make some noise that way and basically do a repeat of what CJ Stroud and the Texans did last year. That would be ideal, of course. That's best case scenario for real. But ideally, like for real, my most realistic hope and expectations for this season is really just for Jayden Daniels to show us why he was worth taking second overall. I mean, wins and losses are technically a quarterback stat, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to really pay too much into the wins and losses column. Of course, as a fan, I want us to go to the playoffs. I'm rooting for us to go to the Super Bowl, and I believe in my heart that we should be able to have a chance to. That's the reason we play the games. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that Jayden Daniels gives us reasons to believe in him moving forward as far as like the 2025 season and beyond. We just need to see those random flashes every game. Like, this is why we spent the second overall pick for him. This is why we went through the torment of the 2023 season, only winning 4 games after starting 2-0 and all of that chaos and drama that we had. And that resulted in us being able to have the opportunity to get Jayden Daniels. Give us that level of hope, Jayden Daniels, throughout this season. Mason Kinahan also pointed out the fact that at a certain point in practice, Jayden Daniels on a keeper took it 75 yards to the house in a chew clock drill. Like, this is supposed to be a drill where you already have the lead. You're just trying to chew the clock. You don't want the other team to get the ball back with a significant amount of time to where they can go and score. You're literally just trying to chew the clock, and Jayden Daniels rips off a run for 75 yards. You know how heartbreaking that would be for an opposing team and their fan base, where just say 2 minutes left in the game, we're up 20-16, and Jayden Daniels, we're trying to run the clock out. He rips it off for 75 yards. Now we're up 27-16 with a minute 30 left. That's pretty much game almost. Like, that's a heartbreaker, and that's basically the scenario that the team created today that Jayden Daniels took advantage of and created that play. And Ben Standig commenting on that run, he said no tackling / hitting the quarterback in camp, yada, 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 whatever. But Jayden Daniels just broke containment and sprinted down the sideline into the end zone. He played to the cheering crowd with a fist in the air, which I also love. But Ben Standig's point basically is that even if this were full-blown contact and the Commanders' defense had no regard for Jayden Daniels' health and safety at all, that probably still would have been the same result of a 75-yard run. Like, he earned that. That wasn't just a you can't touch the quarterback, so let him go. So that was like Jayden Daniels actually earned that 75 yards for what I'm hearing. And then shouts out to Josh Taylor, because I completely agree. Jayden Daniels is going to kill defenses with his legs this year. I can already see it. I'm super excited. Also, shouts out to JP Finley on his podcast with Mitch Tisler, the Beltway Football. He talked about how Jayden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury so far in training camp practices, and a little that we've seen, are already showing signs of running a serious interior design running scheme like the ones the Eagles do with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia. Like, we're not talking about him running to the outside or like, you know, read option, take it to the outside of the tackles, or moving the pocket, scrambling type of stuff. We're talking about in between the tackles, QB draws, or design run game things where Jayden Daniels is going right through the teeth of the defense. And I am concerned a little about that as far as like health wise, but I remember hearing like a few days ago, one of the training camp practices, like day 5, 6, one of those, something like that, Jayden Daniels took a QB draw for a pretty big gain as well, and nobody was able to get their hands on him because they didn't expect it. Plus his speed as well. And somebody also pointed out the fact that he's a very patient runner. He's not just running with neglect for his body or anything like that. He's not running like a typical quarterback. He's running like a running back, where he's allowing the offensive lineman to set up blocks. He's patient, which allows him to maximize the yardage he can get out of any play and potentially keep himself healthy as well. Then Mason Kinahan towards the end of practice tweeted Jayden Daniels' final stat line for August 4th practice, day 9 of training camp. He went 12 of 16, and of those 4 incompletions, 1 was a drop, 2 would have been sacks, so you can blame that on the offensive line and the wide receivers for those other 3, and then only 1 bad pass. So outside of the offensive line, which you would just order, I didn't see the plays, but I'm just going to assume the offensive line takes blame for the 2 sacks, because I already know Jayden Daniels' reputation for being a quick processor and getting the ball out of his hands quickly, and he's very mobile. So I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and if he's taking sacks, it's more than likely the offensive line's fault. But then again, we saw last year with our starting quarterback, Sam Howell, that the quarterback could be a big reason for a lot of the sacks that the quarterback is taking, even outside of the offensive line. He could just be running right into him or holding the ball too long. Who knows? But I'm gonna give Jayden Daniels the benefit of the doubt. So basically, best case scenario, Jayden Daniels technically should have gone 15 and 16 today, because again, 1 incompletion was a drop. He only had 1 bad pass, and don't forget, he had a 75-yard rushing touchdown. So that was an elite day from Jayden Daniels. But again, you don't see a lot of people really talking about it, because it's starting to become the norm. That's the message I'm trying to get across here. And then also, Jayden Daniels spoke to the media after practice, just to run through a few things that he spoke on and some interesting quotes that he had. First of all, speaking on playing in the first preseason game, he said, quote, "I just love playing football. I'm so happy about it. I always knew I was going to play. I don't know when I'm going to play, but I'm just happy to go out there," unquote. And then also talking about signing autographs for fans, especially staying like 30 plus minutes after practice is already over doing it. He talked about how he always wanted to try to give back, and he even talked about at a certain point in the interview, like he remembers being that kid hoping that he can get an autograph for some of his favorite football players. So he wants to be the one that can give those kids the same dreams that he had and fulfill those dreams that he once had as a kid. Daniels also said that every day he's trying to work on how sharp and fast the offense can be. I love that. I mean, it's just like little quotes like that that just are like so loud to me. Maybe to like the casual person, that's just like, that's just coach speak or whatever. But emphasis on being sharp and fast with the offense is very important and very mature for a rookie quarterback, especially a guy who a lot of people accuse of being a running quarterback. Love it. Also, Daniel said that he is getting more comfortable in the system and working with the team in general. That's going to come with time. Jayden Daniels also said that when he's talking about sliding versus trying to gain more yards, he says that his competitive side makes him wants to push, but coaches want him to be smart. We'll see how that goes. Daniels also said that playing the Jets in joint practices will be a new challenge against a new team, and it's a good time for trial and error to see what they can do moving forward. And that sounds like the mentality of a guy that's not going to let a bad play get to him. Throws an interception, oh well, we were trying something, move on from that. Don't let it keep you down and things like that. Shouts out to I'm Bleeding Burgundy and Gold on Twitter. Always, man, shouts out to him. He brought up a great point. He said, I think Jayden seeing how Aaron Rodgers' practices go can be huge. One of my favorite things about joint practices, and I completely agree. Jayden Daniels just being, other than the off the field stuff, if we're just talking about work ethic and talent and just being a legendary quarterback, future Hall of Famer, I hope that a lot of the football stuff of Aaron Rodgers rubs off of Jayden Daniels. Leave all the other unnecessary, annoying stuff alone, even though I don't think Jayden Daniels will let that basically leak into his personality, because you can already see a lot of Jayden Daniels' personality coming out. I mean, I don't know if y'all saw the Kay Adams interview, but Jahan Dotson talked about how Jayden Daniels reminds him as often as possible. I believe he may have even said every day how trash Penn State is. I love that. I mean, that's literally me. If I was Jayden Daniels, I would do the same thing exactly. And then Bobby Wagner even talked about the fact that Jayden Daniels, remember KD said that Jayden Daniels was the KD of football. Bobby Wagner talked about how Jayden Daniels confirmed that, yes, I feel like I'm the KD of football. I agree with Kevin Durant himself. But then Bobby Wagner also went on to say that Jayden Daniels also feels like he's the KD of basketball. And then, of course, Bobby Wagner was laughing and like, nah, he's getting ahead of himself. But that just shows the personality that Jayden Daniels has. He's way more of like a people's person that he may necessarily let off in interviews and in front of the media. When he's around the guys, he's one of the guys, and I love that. Jayden Daniels also talked about his depth chart status for the preseason opener at the Jets, and from what I'm hearing, because I didn't actually see like the actual audio of it, but I saw a lot of people saying that they tried to kind of bait him into a bad answer. He gave a great answer and said, quote, "I know I'm playing, I just don't know if I'm starting or not," unquote. And great answer. And then Daniels also talked about with him and Bobby Wagner talk about throughout practice, and he said, quote, "Me and Bobby are from the same hometown. They're both from the IE, and we don't even talk about football most of the time," unquote. And I thought that was pretty cool. Like, yeah, it would be nice if they talked about his football as much as possible, but with them being from the same area, that bond is just a little bit different. I really respect that, and I love that. Moving on to the running backs, JP Finley talked about how Brian Robinson had a catch out of the backfield and then was very explosive with getting down the field as quickly as possible. And he also pointed out the fact that Brian Robinson is having a great camp. I guess basically outside of that one fumble that Mike Sanverstill snuck behind him and forced. But that's just Mike Sanverstill. He's a future Pro Bowler easily, man. I'm willing to put money on the fact that Mike Sanverstill is going to go to a couple of Pro Bowls, man. So you can't even really knock Brian Robinson too much for that. And overall, he's been having a great camp from what I'm hearing and seeing. I completely agree. Then Ben Standig pointed out the fact that Brian Robinson, the pass catcher, remains underrated. Good hands and can catch on the move. I completely agree. I've been screaming this for weeks, for months, for over a year now, but especially when you saw some flashes last year, even in that Eric Bieniemy offense that didn't necessarily bring out the best in everybody, Brian Robinson showed some flashes of some really good receiving back ability, man. You saw some explosive plays from him in the passing game. I'm telling you, Brian Robinson, great season loading up. Moving on to the wide receivers. First of all, Zach Selby pointed out the fact that Davion Davis had probably the best catch of the 1v1 drills period between wide receivers and defensive backs. He had a grab over Kiyu Blue Kelly near the end zone at a certain point. Now, remember, Davion Davis did have a drop from a beautiful ball from Jayden Daniels at some point in team drills as well, but he looked really good in 1v1s. And then Olamide Zaccheaus had another over-the-shoulder end zone catch as well. And then Zach Selby pointed out the fact, speaking of Olamide Zaccheaus, in his article after practice, he said Olamide Zaccheaus' roster status has not been in question, but it looks like the veteran wide receiver is starting to develop a real connection with his quarterbacks. He has stood out more and more over the past week, particularly during one-on-one matchups. So this is a guy that's eating in the one-on-one drills. He's happy that we've moved on to these one-on-one drills these past week worth of practices. He had an over-the-shoulder touchdown grab, something that has occurred a few times now over Kiyu Blue Kelly. Zaccheaus has been more of a special teams weapon in his career, but he could be some solid depth as he continues to carve out an offensive role for himself as well, potentially. And then Zach Selby also pointed out the fact that the competition at the bottom of the receiver room is definitely heating up, particularly between Bryson Tremaine and Mitchell Tinsley. It's been a common occurrence for Tremaine to come up with explosive plays in practice, and he did it again by wrapping up a day on a touchdown pass from Marcus Mariota. Tinsley also had an impressive day during 11-on-11 drills by coming down with a leaping grab near the middle of the field. And I want to take some time to stop. I don't know if y'all listened to the John Kahn podcast and when Logan Paulson was just on there like yesterday or a couple of days ago, but he talked about how Bryson Tremaine is really, really standing out this year. This is something I foreshadowed before we started to dive into practice and talking about how Bryson Tremaine is always the first one on the field. Well, Logan Paulson said that he's also a really good special teamer. He may just potentially make the team off of that just alone. And then I've been talking about since we brought him in as an undrafted free agent like over a year ago, I said, man, we need a guy with some height. And even more so now, Luke McCaffrey is our tallest receiver outside of Bryson Tremaine at 6'2". Bryson Tremaine is like 6'4", 6'5". He is our tallest receiver by at least 2-3 inches of height right now. And so I think he could potentially make the team just because of that specific niche there as well. But then Logan Paulson was on the John Kahn podcast and pointed out the fact that he's a really good deep down the field threat. Like, he's a bigger target for even a guy like Jayden Daniels to be able to hit him down the field, go up and make contested catches. It seems like basically in a Cliff Kingsbury's offense, they do want like a big, tall receiver that can get down the field quickly, track the ball, and come down with catches. And Bryson Tremaine may fit that role and may end up making a team because he's just like such a unique player on this roster. He's the only guy with that type of build and that type of play style outside of the tight end room, honestly. And then moving on, Linnell Willingham had a very interesting tweet about Dyami Brown. He said D Brown working with Benjamin St-Juste and created some good separation on a dig route. Then he said Dyami Brown, in my opinion, is firmly entrenched as wide receiver 3 right now. He said for now, he's had a strong camp. He's consistently been the third wide receiver with the first team all camp as well. So even though Luke McCaffrey has had a pretty good camp, they're trying to, Anthony Lynn has been working with him to turn him into like a Curtis Samuel, Deebo Samuel type of player, where he can also double up as like a running back that gets the ball out of the backfield and makes things shake, things like that. And then he's also had some highlights, some blocking highlights, where he even pancaked my dog Trey Owens a few days ago in practice. And he's, again, I'm saying all of that to say that he has been having a good camp, but Dyami Brown has apparently stood out as the third best receiver on this team. And even just by the reps, follow the reps, just like with high school recruiting, it's going to college and things like that. Follow the visits. When it comes to who may potentially be winning depth chart wise, follow the reps. Who's out there with the starters more? Dyami Brown has been out there with the starters more. And on top of that, let's not forget the fact that, like I've been saying for months now, Dyami Brown is arguably our best blocking wide receiver. It's between him and Terry McLaurin, and that's going to be big time in an offense that wants to run the ball. All of these running backs that we have that are talented, your quarterback can run really well. It's going to be one of the deadliest quarterbacks using the legs in the NFL. And then you have all of these receivers that want to get yards after the catch. We have all of these tight ends. We're probably going to want to run a lot of screens and things like that. A wide receiver that can block is going to be highly coveted in this offense that Cliff Kingsbury wants to run. And then on top of that, just a few days ago, Dan Quinn said before practice that Dyami Brown has stood out as one of the best receivers on the team as far as getting open during scramble drill. Like I keep saying, once 5 seconds have passed after the snap of the ball, X's and O's are pretty much cooked. It's done. This is all about who's going to make a play at this point, and Dyami Brown seems to be one of the better playmakers when Jayden Daniels is utilizing those legs that we love him for, and he's scrambling around and trying to make something shake, and he's looking for a receiver to get the ball to. Once again, the X's and O's are cooked, and we're now just in a full-blown scramble drill, backyard football, every man for himself at this point. Dyami Brown has stood out to Dan Quinn as one of the better receivers at that. So with all of this praise that's coming towards Dyami Brown's way, this may be a real thing. So it sounds like Terry McLaurin is your wide receiver 1, your X. Jahan Dotson is your wide receiver 2. If Dyami Brown really is the third best receiver, at least depth chart wise as of today, over Luke McCaffrey, I would move Jahan Dotson to the slot and have Dyami Brown as the Z receiver. If not, if Luke McCaffrey will, ultimately the goal is for Luke McCaffrey to be a third best receiver. I mean, maybe even second best, just ceiling wise and freakish athleticism wise. We'll see. That'll probably be way down the road. That will not be anytime this year, I don't think. And I think Jahan Dotson's a great receiver, so I don't necessarily expect Luke McCaffrey to ever dethrone him as the second best receiver. I'm just saying that Luke McCaffrey can eventually become a great receiver for us. I'm very excited about his potential. But either way, if Luke McCaffrey is your third best receiver and Dyami Brown is your fourth, I would put Luke McCaffrey as your big slot, and then you can have Jahan Dotson at the Z as far as that goes. But if Dyami Brown, as so far, I'm thinking Jahan Dotson, especially just because of his smaller size. Dyami Brown is a bigger guy. I would put Dyami at the Z, Jahan Dotson in the slot, Terry McLaurin is your X. That would just be me. But those apparently are your top 4 receivers. And George Carmen brings up a great point. The wide receiver group will be one to watch for Washington. That's one of our biggest camp battles right now. If I had to guess right now, I'd peg the first 4 players as locks: Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Dyami Brown, Luke McCaffrey. Those are locks. After that, his prediction is Olamide Zaccheaus and Bryson Tremaine if we only keep 6 wide receivers. And I'm not going to lie, those are probably my 6 as well. I'd probably throw Casper Allen in there there as a 7th. I think you keep 7 just because Casman Allen, as of right now, it's between him and Mike Sainristil, according to Dan Quinn, have stood out as our best returners right now, especially kick returning wise. So, and Casman Allen's been making plays on offense as well. So those are probably, as of today, maybe your 7 leading receivers according to the depth chart, but who knows? Anything could be up for grabs. Also, we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to show you more clips of this when we get to the defensive part of this breakdown. But the Commanders have this new tackling thing that I don't think I've ever seen before, and Terry McLaurin loved it. Like, after he was able to do it, and it's interesting that we had wide receivers working on tackling drills. We had them with the DBs, and I've noticed that we've been cross-training DBs and wide receivers a lot in training camp practice. I'm loving what the coaches are doing. This is really weird, but it's a really good weird, because remember that one drill where they had to like run through several bags and then hurry up and turn around, catch the ball, and then toe tap right at the sideline before falling out of bounds? They had not only wide receivers doing that, which I thought that was a really good drill for them as well, but they had the defensive backs doing that as well. They've gotten really creative with the cross training, and the wide receivers and DBs have been doing a lot of the same exact drills in practice, and this one's no different. They have the wide receivers doing the tackling drill, and again, Terry McLaurin seemed to be pretty fired up after he did his. Like, he seemed to really enjoy this a little bit more than I expected.
Go, 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 go. Use that leverage, Terry. Use your leverage right there.
And then remember that highlight that Ben Standig predicted that the Commanders would later end up posting on their Twitter account? Well, they did end up posting it. Here it is, the Jayden Daniels to Jahan Dotson 35-yard throw, whatever it was, deep down the field. Here's that play right here. And I completely agree with Scott Abraham here. This is starting to be a real connection here, man. Look for Jahan to have a big bounce back season. Jayden Daniels loves throwing him the ball. If I had to pick right now who are Jayden Daniels' favorite targets, I think it's Terry, Jahan, and Zach Ertz. Even though that's not like a bold prediction, that's kind of what you'd assume it would be at this point. But it's really nice to hear like people that are going to the practices say, yeah, that information is confirmed. Remember, Serge the Shooter just said a couple of days ago that you may want to draft Zach Ertz in fantasy, because that is like his go-to guy. Terry McLaurin's they've been working on that connection. Jahan Dotson, you've been seeing more recently, day after day, recent training camp practices, that connection with Jayden Daniels has been growing as well. And also shouts out to Mark Bullock, because I completely agree with this. I didn't even think about this. This is a great point. The Commanders social media team does an excellent job of hiding as much as they can with these clips, because if you go back and look at the clip, especially this one in particular, a lot of the clips are super zoomed in on Daniels, then slow-mo the ball in the air zoomed in so we can't see any of the routes or any of the defenders, and then the ball is just suddenly caught by the receiver out of nowhere. And shame that those not at the practices don't get to see that much. And I agree. I mean, it sucks that, again, my thing is, it sucks that like me not going to the practices, I'm in Atlanta and everything like that, I'm not getting to see much. But at the end of the day, if we have to sacrifice my fan experience during the off season and not being able to see things that they're doing in practice, and it ends up helping them strategically in the regular season and it potentially leads to more wins, then have at it. Don't show us another highlight from practice if you can promise us a playoff berth this season. I do not care. I would love to be a part of the process, but I care way more about the result. I'm not gonna lie. And then tight end wise, John Bates received more praise from Dan Quinn this morning, and I mean, this is starting to be a consistent thing. Remember, when we first put on the pads, the first day of pads, after that, Dan Quinn pointed out 5 guys that stood out the most once they put the pads on. John Bates on offense, Jonathan Allen and Dorrance Armstrong on defense, and Casman Allen and Mike Sainristil on special teams. John Bates has been consistently getting compliments from Dan Quinn, just pointing them out. I'm not even sure if people are asking about John Bates. Dan Quinn is just going out of his way to just talk about John Bates. And then Dan Quinn also said that he's been most impressed with Ben Sinnott for his work on contested catches. Remember that one highlight where I showed y'all the clip in one of the training camp practice breakdowns where Jayden Daniels threw the ball behind. It was a pretty bad ball from Jayden Daniels, and Ben Sinnott running this way had to like contort his body and grab it from behind with one arm and was able to corral it in. That was the part of the game that Quinn said that he wasn't sure about when they took Ben Sinnott, but he's done a really good job with the contested catches since they drafted him, and Zach Ertz and John Bates have been doing a good job setting an example for the rookie to learn from. I love it. And then JP Finley pointed out the fact that at some point in practice, my boy Armani Rogers, y'all already know the list, man. Armani Rogers, Jeremy Chin, and Tyler Owens. Those are the guys that I'm most intrigued by as far as practice updates go, because they are the freak athletes of all freak athletes. They are the absolute aliens with the ridiculously high ceiling and potential. So I love hearing updates about those guys. Those are my guys on this team. And Armani Rogers apparently had a nice catch from Marcus Mariota today. And JP Finley pointed out the fact that he is a real riser from last year before the Achilles injury. And JP Finley also said that Rogers needs to show out in preseason to force his way onto the 53-man roster. He seems like a long shot after adding Zach Ertz and Ben Sinnott, but that's why they play the games. Rogers would have practice squad eligibility if they choose to go that way. But I do want to point out the fact that Logan Paulson, my fault, who was on the John Con podcast. Again, they dropped a lot of gems in that podcast a couple of days ago. One of the biggest things that stood out was the fact that Logan Paulson, as an ex-tight end, he was a tight end at the NFL level when he played. So if there's any position group that he knows how to evaluate, it would be tight end. His point was that he feels like Armani Rogers actually does have a pretty good chance of making this roster, because Zach Ertz is your really good mismatch in the receiving game. You already have John Bates as a great blocker. He said that he's noticed so far in practices that Ben Sinnott has been a very physical blocker. So if we get in a goal line situation and we want to just completely run through the teeth of the defense and just punch them in the mouth, you have John Bates, Ben Sinnott on the field as tight ends that, they could potentially go out and leak out for a catch, so the defense can't completely stack the box. You have Brian Robinson as the running back. So those are your two physical tight ends. So then now your fourth tight end should probably be a guy that could be a mismatch and that's difficult to cover and that can contribute in the receiving game often, like a Zach Ertz. And Armani Rogers will be that guy. I like Cole Turner, but he's a contested catch god. He's not a guy that can get open on his own like an Armani Rogers can. You saw before he got hurt in 2022, he was pretty much healthy throughout 2022. He got hurt in 2023. But back in 2022 under Scott Turner, when we started to give him the ball out of the backfield and he was making people miss and was getting yards after getting the ball in the backfield off of screens, like he was Deebo Samuel or Curtis Samuel or something like that at the tight end position. So this is a guy that's extremely athletic. He has traits that you just cannot teach. He's improving as a blocker. And so Logan Paulson is basically making the case that Armani Rogers probably has a good chance of making his roster as the fourth tight end on the team. Colson Yankov has made some plays. Again, Cole Turner is a contested catch god, but I think Armani Rogers just makes more sense for the ceiling, for the type of tight end that we need behind John Bates and Ben Sinnott, who are very physical blockers. It just makes way too much sense. Then offensive line wise, Dan Quinn said that he's looking forward to seeing rookie left tackle Brandon Coleman versus the Jets defensive line in joint practices this week. I'm not gonna lie, outside of Jayden Daniels, Brandon Coleman is the guy that I'm gonna have my eye on the most at those joint practices versus the Jets. I'm not gonna lie, because if we can solve franchise quarterback and franchise left tackle in the same draft, that is the best possible draft scenario that you could even have. Even ignoring Johnny Newton, Mike Sanderstill, Ben Sinnott, and Jordan McGee, who I really feel strongly will end up being really good players for us, and Luke McCaffrey. I mean, just franchise left tackle, franchise quarterback from a draft, you consider that a success alone. And if Brandon Coleman is actually really ready to start, like it seems like he is, by week 1 of the regular season, home run of a draft. And Dan Quinn also said, quote, they've got some good rushers on the outside with a good test for him, unquote. And I completely agree. I mean, I like the potential that we have in our edge rusher group. We have some decent talent, but we don't have dominant edge rushers. We don't have a Micah Parsons. We don't have a Brian Burns. We don't have any just like purely electric, guaranteed double-digit sack guy in our edge rusher room right now. So Brandon Coleman looks really good against the guys that we have. What does he look like when we go up against the Jets and their defensive line? When we go up against the Dolphins and he has to go against against guys like Bradley Chubb and stuff like that. What is he going to look like against them? So I can't wait for those tests, because if he passed those tests, then it looks like we really do have our starting left tackle for week 1 against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Dan Quinn also said that he's been really pleased with starting left guard, potentially, in my opinion, Nick Allegretti, and likes that he can play 2 spots, both guard and center. Allegretti is very detailed, and working next to Brandon Coleman has been excellent. Dan Quinn said, quote, "He's really been off to a good start. He's got real communication and leadership skills to him," unquote. And then shouts out to Linnell Willingham, because he pointed out the fact that there was a lot of mixing and matching along the offensive line today because of all of the guys that were out. But basically, you had Trent Scott for the second straight practice as your first team right tackle, and then Cornelius Lucas working as the second team left tackle. So for some reason, Cornelius Lucas is a backup no matter how many offensive linemen we have out. Cornelius Lucas is just behind Trent Scott, behind Andrew Wiley, behind all of these guys as far as the tackle position goes, which is really interesting. And then Jayden Daniels, apparently, according to Linnell Willingham, has been working as the third team left tackle. So they try to make guard for a little bit. He's going right back to tackle. I guess guard didn't work out. I don't expect him to make this team at all, but maybe there's some hope for him at tackle. And then Nikki Javala pointed out the fact that, again, the Commanders were down 2 tackles today, and at a certain point, Mason Brooks had to fill in that tackle. And this is a guy that's like a backup center, kind of like a backup guard as well. I like his talent. He was a priority undrafted free agent for a reason. We literally had to compete with other teams to get the chance to sign him onto our team. So this is a highly coveted guy after the draft, after the 2022 draft. But this guy's an interior offensive line, point blank, period. And I know we have tackles down, but Mason Brooks at tackle is insane. So we got to work on that. Again, Jayden Daniels ended up going to the sideline at some point. That's why Mason Brooks had to fill in that tackle, and I don't think I've ever heard of Mason Brooks filling in that tackle at any point the past couple of years. We'll see what happens with that. I mean, my fault. After the 2023 draft, we got Mason Brooks last year, not the year before that. My fault on that. But either way, at this point, I feel like Brandon Coleman is basically the starting left tackle already. I wanted to run through all of that to get to this point, because you notice how nobody mentioned who was a starting left tackle, right? We talked about second string left tackle, third string left tackle, first team right tackle, first team right guard, and things like that. No mention of the starting team left tackle. And you know why? Because it's already assumed and expected now that Brandon Coleman is your starting left tackle. It hasn't officially been announced yet, but if you just got to follow the reps and the coach's compliments, follow the reps, follow the compliments from the coaching staff themselves. We're really just waiting to see if he passes the test against the Jets in joint practice, and probably that first preseason game against the Jets to officially announce it. Probably the same situation with Jayden Daniels. Now moving on to the defensive side of the ball. And again, like I alluded to earlier, shouts out to Nikki Javala for pointing this out. The Commanders do have a new tackling toy. Here's the clip of that. Again, you already saw a little bit of it with Terry McLaurin, but here's some defensive players tackling it. And then shouts out to Ben Standig for uploading this clip, and he tweeted with it, "Take out some aggression." And this is a nice way for some of the players to kind of get some of their aggression out. This is a really interesting tackling toy. I'm really intrigued by it. And then shouts out to my boy Colin Duffy at MofoPod for saying that it is a check down league, so I like the emphasis on tackling, and that's a great point. This is a really heavy check down league, and we need guys to be able to step up and tackle in the open field, similar to what that drill is kind of simulating right there. And then moving on to the defensive line, as you see on the field, this is your new Commanders defensive tackle, Taylor Stallworth. Shouts out to David Harrison for uploading this clip. He just signed the morning of this practice ahead of practice number 9, August 4th on Sunday. And just to remind you again, we signed him to just a 1-year little cheap little deal. He last played with the Texans in 2022 in one game after a small 6-game stint with the Chiefs. This is just a really super duper depth chart piece type of thing. Like Dan Quinn said earlier, they just want Johnny Newton and Jonathan Allen to have less wear and tear in them in practices, so they just felt like they needed another defensive tackle included in the rotation in practices. This is a guy that I do not expect to make the 53-man roster, more than likely just a camp body, but still interesting that we signed him. And then also in 11 on 11s, Dan Quinn at some point was working with Fedarian Mathis just to show him some technique stuff on his pass rush. So separate from an 11 on 11s, taking them off to the side, Dan Quinn was personally working with Fedarian Mathis on some pass rush stuff. And Mark Tyler brought up a good question. Is this just a lost cause? or is this like a potential breakout candidate with the coach giving him more attention? And shouts out to my boy Jamal at Let Maul Tell It. Make sure you follow him on Twitter, YouTube. He works for Hogs Haven and all of that. Great guy to follow, does film sessions and everything. He brought up a great point. He said he's impressed with Quinn's willingness to spend some extra time with his players. If this time spent works out for the best with Big Phil, good news for Washington. But I like hearing Dan investing into his guys. This shouldn't be viewed as a knock on the player. Good coaches coach. I completely agree. I'm right with that. And then shouts out to my boy Linnell Willingham, because like I said before the intro, maybe we should not give up on Jamin Davis quite this soon. Because he pointed out the fact that Jamin Davis was at the edge during the team period with the ones opposite of Cleveland Farrell. So you had so I don't know, maybe they were just doing a rotation thing. Dorrance Armstrong was not out there at a certain point with the starters. So they had Cleveland Farrell on one side, Jamin Davis on the other, going against the starting defensive line. But again, just to remind you, a lot of our starting offensive line was out today. But either way, Linnell said that he's been solid working on games and stunts. So he's getting a lot of the nuanced mental stuff down. Of course, we still got to work on like pass rush moves and counters. That's not just going to be something he figures out overnight, but he said that he has been a lot better there versus 1v1 pass rush situations. So Jamin Davis is apparently improving. But then Nikki Javala later tweeted a gif of basically the Commanders defensive line completely destroying the Commanders offensive line today in practice. Sounds like it was a dominant day for the defensive line. But again, you got to remember that your projected starting right side of the offensive line was out today. No Andrew Wiley, potentially at tackle, but most importantly, no Samuel Cosmi as clearly your starting right guard, your future all-pro right guard. Now moving on to the linebacker position, no matter how much I was digging, Twitter, anywhere, any articles, I didn't see any mention of the linebacker. So I apologize, but nobody really talked about them today. I'm going to try my best to get some report on the linebackers for next practice when I do another training camp breakdown. Now moving on to the corners, shouts out to Grant Paulson, because he did talk about the fact that the Commanders released Christian Holmes this morning, but he also added to that Christian Holmes was a 7th round pick during the Rivera era, and he did help them. That's a win. You get any production from a 7th round pick, that's technically a win in Rivera's case. But he also continued to say that he'll be fascinated to see how many of the Rivera draft picks end up on the bubble moving forward. Washington signed a ton of new potential contributors. I talked about this in my breakdown earlier today, technically yesterday by now, but I talked about how a lot of Rivera's draft picks are gone, and I'm really intrigued to see how many of them actually last throughout this whole purge, just getting into the first season under the Adam Peters and Dan Quinn era. And then Felix Trammell also pointed out the fact that Ron Rivera era is now being expunged quickly here in Ashburn. Really says something about the talent level assessment from Peters and company. I agree. Then JP Finley pointed out the fact in the cornerback group that Emmanuel Forbes had a few good reps in 1v1s. He had a strong pass breakup on a fade to Dyami Brown. Again, you've been hearing all of these compliments about Dyami Brown, about Terry McLaurin, and apparently Emmanuel Forbes has been going toe-to-toe with both of them and had a really good day today on 1v1s. And I want to emphasize over and over again, there's no way I can emphasize it enough, but I really want y'all to understand, when it's one-on-one drills, wide receivers versus corners, it's literally set up for the corners to fail. It's not even technically a 1v1 because it's the quarterback as well. It's not like the quarterback is some robot that's just going to throw it into a 50-50 ball situation every time. It is a quarterback that's trying to complete a pass and throw it whether it be through timing or accuracy or touch or a mix of all three. They're trying to do their best to get the ball in a position where only the receiver can get it and the DB can't. It's literally set up for cornerbacks to fail, and for a cornerback to ever win a rep in those situations, that's elite stuff. That's basically like you can say that these guys can be on an island with no safety help and still succeed. I don't want them to really do that in games, especially when wins and losses matter, but that's just elite stuff from Emmanuel Forbes to be able to do that. And then Zach Selby also went on and pointed out the fact that Emmanuel Forbes has shown consistent improvement in coverage from his rookie season. This is a guy that's clearly getting better. You could argue that if we were to do like an award ceremony and then we handed out most improved player from last year, Emmanuel Forbes would probably win that award. I'm not gonna lie. Then moving on, Ben Standig pointed out the fact that during one-on-one red zone drills with the wide receivers and corners, Mike Sanverstill created some tough passing angles on a couple of throws. He's been pretty locked down as well. And then Linnell pointed out the fact that Mike Sanderstill was even getting work at outside corner with the second team at a certain point in practice. So not only is this guy one of your two best returners, which I mean, it kind of sucks because I don't think they want to use him as a returner because he's so valuable on defense. Then not only is he already your starting slot and going to be one of the best slot corners, if not the best slot corner in the NFL, I believe sooner rather than later. But now he's out there with the second team as outside corner. Not third team outside corner, second team. Like after Emmanuel Forbes and Benjamin St. Juste sit down and we go with the second team guys. It's Marcus Mariota and those guys out there. And then I'm assuming it's Michael Davis. And then they have Mike Sanderstill, the outside corner this time. When does this guy even take the time to breathe in practice? Lord have mercy. But that's just elite stuff there. That he's just that good at corner. We're going to talk about him again soon when we talk about special teams. And then just like linebacker, I really couldn't dig up any information on safety. Nobody really talked about the safeties today. Really nothing. So I really tried. So we're going to go ahead and move on to special teams. Special teams wise, punt return drills. Yeah, Olamide Zaccheaus, Jahan Dotson, Casimir Allen, Emmanuel Forbes, and Mike Sanderstill. Zach Selby said in his article after practice that Mike Sanderstill is still a part of the contingent of players catching kicks and kickoff return and punt return drills. And it's easy to see why the team is giving the Michigan defensive back a shot to get on the field. He showed impressive vision moving through his blockers, zipping past tacklers for a decent game at some point today in returning drills. Again, just to remind you, Dan Quinn, after the first day of putting on the pads, said that the two returners that stood out the most to him were Casimir Allen and Mike Sanderstill. That should tell you everything you need to know. Then moving on, kicker competition wise, Ramiz Ahmed missed his kick from 42 yards. And so I was like, okay, is this the chance for Riley Patterson to finally show up and replace Ramiz Ahmed as the assumed starting kicker right now? At least take the lead in the kicker competition? Well, no, he fumbled the bag because Ramiz Ahmed ended up finishing the day 4 or 5, only missing that 42-yarder, whereas Riley Patterson ended up finishing the day 3 or 5. So we need to go find a third kicker right now because I just refuse to believe that a guy that was Chris Blewett's backup in the UFL is going to be our starting kicker going into the week 1 of the regular season. I hope we never have to kick field goals. We might as well go for it 2-point conversions every time we score a touchdown at that rate. And then lastly, as for special teams wise, John Com tweeted the fact that Washington, this is really interesting. Washington worked out 2 punters today, but this is a due diligence thing in a case of emergency arises later. That's one part, but also he emphasized that there's nothing wrong with Trey, and both of the punters that they brought in were right foot punters. Tressway is a left-footed punter, and basically pointed out the fact that when they go against the Jets in joint practices and the preseason, their punter is right-footed. So they basically wanted to give all of our returners today, like I already gave you the list of them, was Zaccheaus and Jahan Dotson, Casimir Allen, Emmanuel Forbes, and Mike Sanderstill. They wanted to make sure that those guys had some sort of experience in practice rehearsing catching punts from a right-footed kicker, which again Tressway is not. That's why they brought in 2 right-footed kickers so that those guys could get. So this is more of a kick returner, punt returner thing than the actual punting position itself, while we brought those 2 right-foot kickers in. Then, before we get up out of here, I try to end it with a couple of overall reviews of the practice from a couple of guys. We have my boy George Carmi with one, and my boy Linnell Willingham with a quick one as well. George Carmi said, one thing I'll say about this coaching staff, they're young, hands-on, and enthusiastic. And this came from a quote tweet from Nikki Javala showing you the clip of that new tackling toy that everybody was tackling, including even Terry McLaurin and the receivers. And he also continued with saying, I've been impressed with Coach Darryl Tapp and Ryan Kerrigan on the defensive side, and Cliff Kingsbury has been great on offense. So his overall takeaway is that the coaches have been coaching. They've been very passionate, hands-on, very enthusiastic. I mean, the energy is just different. The focus, the motivation, the determination, everything is just on a different level from what he's noticed in practices so far. And then Linnell ended practice by saying Brandon Coleman and Trent Scott were your first team tackles for the 3rd straight practice. I really wanted to emphasize that. And then he also said that the versatile pass rush is improving right now, which includes Jamin Davis. So we're starting to get our pass rush going. I'm really excited about that. And then lastly, before we get up out of here, I just have a quick 17-second clip of Jayden Daniels standing after practice and signing things for the kids, like he talked about in his post-game press conference of signing things for kids, because he remembers the times that he was that kid and wanted his things signed sign from his favorite football players, and he's giving back that way. So here's that quick 17-second clip if you wanted to see that. If you really need to skip that, you can just skip ahead 17 seconds from now.
Yeah! How cool is this? Oh my God! How cool is this? He saw my ball. My jersey. He saw my ball, my jersey.
Jayden, right here too.
He saw my jersey.
Look good today, man.
But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in the video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content, man. I really appreciate y'all. Again, any day that we have access to practice, whether it's media members and or fans or whatever, and I get any information, any clips from it, you're gonna get videos just like this one running around an hour long. I really appreciate y'all. Make sure you leave a like on this video. Do not leave this video without leaving a like, and of course let me know in the comment section how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Do you agree or disagree with any of my points about the fact that Jamin Davis is improving, about the fact that Dyami Brown is a roster lock and is at right now our third best receivers? Do you agree about the fact that our corners are starting to improve, most notably Emmanuel Forbes? And how you feel about Jayden Daniels running for 75 yards? Let me know how you feel about all of the major points today, and of course all of the injuries that we're dealing with right now. None of them absolutely severe, really, outside of Alex Akambulu, who already wasn't necessarily going to make the team anyway. I don't want to talk bad on him, but you know, my main point is that we have had no real significant injuries to anybody that we plan on having to actually contribute for us on Sunday. So we're lucky. You have other teams out here losing their starting quarterbacks, they're starting starters everywhere on the team, so we're fairly lucky. But still, let me know how you feel about how this most recent practice had, you know, a couple of injuries piling up. Definitely the most injury-filled practice result that we've had so far. Again, do not leave this video without leaving a like. I really appreciate y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.